Have you ever wondered what would happen if, one day, you discovered that everything you knew about your life was a lie? What if, in seeking answers, you were confronted with such a bombshell truth that it would change everything you believed about yourself? This is the story of Lucas, a man who, upon uncovering the secrets of his past, not only unraveled the mystery of his parents' disappearance but also faced a dilemma that many of us could never imagine: what to do when the truth is harder to accept than the lie. Get ready to be surprised by the ups and downs of this emotional journey, where destiny and each person's choices can change the course of an entire life story. Are you ready to discover what really happened? Lucas's childhood was marked by a loss he could never fully comprehend. When he was still very young, a tragic accident took his parents, leaving him orphaned in a world that seemed to have lost its charm. Suddenly, the joy of play and family protection disappeared, and he was thrust into the solitude of orphanages. The boy, with his eyes full of doubts, learned early on that life could be cruel, that death came without warning, without mercy. The pain of loss was his constant companion, and it was this that shaped his worldview, a view that always made him feel out of place, as if happiness were something distant, almost unattainable. Growing up without the affection of a mother or the support of a father meant living in an endless cycle of new beginnings. Each new home, each new foster house, brought promises of a better future, but these were soon broken by the hands of indifference. Lucas knew that to survive, he would need to be strong, stronger than any child should have to be. He had no one to turn to, no one to hug him in moments of fear, no one to teach him hope. Thus, the struggle for survival became his only companion, and the word future always seemed to hide under the weight of loneliness. However, looking at the other children around him, Lucas noticed something peculiar. While everyone seemed to find ways to play, to smile, to dream of the future, he withdrew into himself, always suspicious of others' intentions. He knew that nothing was given freely. The true battle, he understood, was not just to grow up, but to understand what it meant to live with such a great void inside. How could someone feel complete if even their name and origin were shrouded in mystery? He didn't know, but he was determined to find out. What many did not realize was that Lucas was on a silent journey, an internal journey, where answers would not come easily. He learned with each day, with each difficulty, that the greatest obstacle was not the world around him, but the fear he carried within himself. Fear of being rejected again, fear of being vulnerable, fear of trusting. But something inside him began to change. What seemed like an endless story, without perspective, began to take on new contours. Like dew forming on leaves, hope slowly began to emerge, without Lucas yet knowing that it would be the key to everything that would follow. Even without realizing it, he was learning, silently, to build resilience. The loneliness that seemed to be his enemy became his strength. The orphanage, with all its limitations and difficulties, taught him more than any school could. It taught him to be independent. He didn't know it yet, but he was being forged for something greater, something that would go beyond what anyone could imagine. And it was in this context, amid the daily struggle for survival, that the great turning point began to take shape. At 18, Lucas left the orphanages behind. He didn't know exactly what the future held for him, but he was willing to face the world. Like a mechanic in a workshop full of rusty cars and broken engines, he threw himself into his new life in the big city. It was time to prove that the struggle for survival was just beginning. But what would this new life be like without the protection of a home and the comfort of the familiar? He still didn't know, but destiny was about to put to the test all the lessons he had learned so far. And with this new beginning, Lucas couldn't imagine what was to come. The big city seemed to promise opportunities, but also new challenges. He was about to face battles that had so far been only a distant glimpse. What he didn't know was that this journey, marked by pain, loss, and loneliness, would soon take a completely unexpected turn. Like the pieces of a puzzle slowly fitting together, Lucas would soon begin to understand that his true struggle was only beginning, and that the greatest challenge was not surviving the big city, but discovering his true origin. At 18 years old, Lucas made the decision to leave the orphanages behind and venture into the big city. Without any family ties, without a place to call home, he knew that survival would be his main battle. What many called independence, for him was a daily struggle. He had no one to turn to for advice or support. He found himself forced to learn how to handle the challenges of a world that shows no mercy to the weak. Working as a mechanic emerged as an opportunity, but it was not an easy life. The weight of the tools, the unbearable heat of the workshop, and the frustration of seeing the sweat on his brow not translate into significant profits were things Lucas soon had to get used to. Each day was a silent war against the difficulties of adult life. Lucas, with his limited experience, did not know that the big city would present new obstacles around every corner. The first of these was loneliness. The city seemed enormous, but he felt tiny, like a lost ant in a world full of people. He had no friends, no support circle. In the workshop, his only focus was to work and earn enough to survive. But what he did not know was that this struggle for survival would transform him in ways he could never imagine. It was not just the hard work that consumed him, but also the numerous temptations that arose along the way. Every choice, every decision he made, was a battle between morality and the need to survive. He saw people around him making choices he knew were not right, but sometimes it was hard to resist the temptation to cross the line to secure a little relief. The physical and emotional stress of working day after day, without ever seeing a significant improvement, began to affect his mind. But there was something else Lucas felt, something he could not ignore. There was a force inside him, something that drove him to keep going. He did not know what it was yet, but he knew he couldn't stop. The city, with its rush and incessant sounds, seemed a reflection of Lucas's internal struggle. Every corner brought a new opportunity, but also a new difficulty. He learned, day by day, that the true struggle was not just to make money, but to maintain his dignity. And so, Lucas began to shape himself. He learned that the scars of a difficult life do not need to be visible to exist. Each of us carries our own battles, sometimes internal, other times external, but what is important is how we move forward. He began to realize that even without a family to support him, there was a strength in his persistence, a strength he never imagined he had. In this new world, he saw what it truly meant to be a survivor. Many around him gave up, succumbed to pressure, loneliness, and hopelessness. But Lucas, although he often wanted to give up, couldn't. He knew that his struggle was not just for himself, but for everything he still did not know about himself. It was not just about getting back on his feet, but understanding that the fight for survival was not something done alone. There was always a choice. And he was beginning to understand that the choice to keep moving forward was the most important of all. And so Lucas faced his days in a city that challenged him at every moment. But what he did not know was that, by persisting, by continuing his fight, he was getting closer and closer to a truth he could never have imagined. What would this truth be? Something that would completely change the trajectory of his life and perhaps, just perhaps, give him the key to discover something even greater. But for that, he would need something more than strength and courage. He would need answers. It was an ordinary day when Lucas decided to clean the old trunk he had found in the back of a dark corner of his small apartment. Upon opening the lid with some effort, he felt a strange sensation, as if that object held something important. Among the piles of clothes and old objects, he found a letter. It was no ordinary letter. It was carefully folded, with the seal of his biological parents. The name Lucas was written in handwriting he quickly recognized. With his heart beating faster, he began to read, unaware that this discovery would change his life forever. The letter revealed something so incredible that Lucas needed a few minutes to process the words. His parents, whom he believed had died in an accident, were actually alive somewhere in the world, and the most surprising, he was the heir to a great fortune. What seemed impossible was now before him, in words being revealed almost mystically, like a key to a past he didn't even know existed. He read it again, trying to absorb every word. The letter spoke about renouncing wealth, his parents' choice for a simple life, away from fame and fortune, and a large property in a city he had never heard of. The shock was immense. What do you mean? He was heir to an aristocratic family, but had no memories of his parents? The life he had led up to that moment seemed so distant from that luxurious reality. And even stranger, why had his parents chosen to abandon everything and disappear? The most important, how did he fit into this story? What did that mean for him now, after so many years living with the weight of loneliness and the struggle for survival? What else could be hidden in that letter? The answers seemed to be there, but it also left more questions than answers. Lucas felt the weight of the revelation on his shoulders. The feeling of belonging to nothing, of having no origin, seemed finally to have been filled. However, what he didn't know was that this discovery, instead of bringing clear answers, would only plunge him into a whirlwind of uncertainties. He didn't know how or where to start, but one thing he was sure of, he needed to find out more. Who were his parents really? Why did they decide to hide their true identity? And more importantly, what should he do with this information now that he had it? He needed to find the answers. The desire to understand his origin and, even more, what he should do with the fortune that was suddenly promised to him, began to grow in his heart. Lucas didn't know for sure what the impact of his decision would be, but something inside him said he couldn't simply ignore that secret. The discovery seemed to be only the tip of an iceberg. Something much bigger was about to be revealed. As if a door had been opened, Lucas now found himself facing an unknown path. A path that would lead him to places and revelations he never imagined. He only knew that his life as he knew it would never be the same. With every word of the letter, Lucas felt the urgency to act. He couldn't leave it for later. The weight of the inheritance and the responsibility to understand what his parents had done took hold of him. But at the same time, something prevented him from launching into this search immediately. What else could be hidden in that mansion? What would he find in the city mentioned in the letter? The feeling that there was more behind his parents' story consumed him. Now, he needed to decide what the next step would be. And like every great discovery, this decision would not be simple. What would he choose? To dive headfirst into this story or to keep his distance? Lucas didn't take long to make a decision. After reading the letter so many times, he knew he couldn't ignore the call of his origin. The city mentioned in the letter seemed small, perhaps even a bit distant, but he was determined to learn more about his family and, who knows, unravel the mysteries intertwined in his story. The trip was quick, but filled with questions and expectations. What would he find there? Would the Alvarenga family mansion really be as he imagined? Or would it be another lie, a fantasy far removed from the harsh reality he knew? Each kilometer traveled brought another whirlwind of emotions. When he arrived in the city, the feeling of being a stranger in that place was almost palpable. Everything seemed so familiar and, at the same time, so distant. Lucas felt as if he were entering a fairy tale, but without the privileges of a storybook hero. The Alvarenga family mansion, in the distance, was imposing, with its iron gates and walls covered in untold stories. He wasn't quite sure what he expected to find there, but the pressure in his chest increased with every step. The letter, which initially seemed like a clear clue, now appeared to be just a door he still couldn't fully open. The first meeting with the lawyers was strangely formal. They seemed to know more about him than he did himself, and this made him uncomfortable. When they entered the mansion, he felt like an intruder, someone who was there by a twist of fate. The lawyers treated him with a certain reverence, but at the same time, with a coldness that made him question their intentions. What did they really want from Lucas? He didn't know, but he felt there was something more in that place than he could perceive at first glance. They talked about rights, inheritances, and documents, but Lucas couldn't take his eyes off the ancient statues, the portraits on the walls, and the details that seemed to scream secrets about his family. The conversation was slow, full of formalities that Lucas didn't fully understand. What he knew was that he was being tested, as if he were a piece in a game whose rules he didn't know. Every question the lawyers asked seemed like an attempt to measure his worth or his intentions. But what he truly wanted was just to understand the truth. How could his parents, such distant figures, have belonged to that powerful family, yet so secretly detached from everything he knew? He felt unwelcome, but he also couldn't abandon that opportunity. There was something in that mansion, within the walls of those luxurious rooms, that called to him, something he knew he should discover. As the meeting progressed, the lawyers, though polite, continued to treat Lucas as someone who didn't have the answers to the most difficult questions. He realized he was being led down a path he didn't completely understand. The lawyers had something else in mind, but he couldn't decipher what it was. No matter how much they tried to hide it, there was a tension in the air, something between them that he couldn't ignore. Who are these people really? And why were they so interested in him, a simple mechanic who was now facing an inheritance he didn't even know if he deserved? And then, as Lucas tried to concentrate on the conversation, something in his thoughts made him stop. He began to understand that this journey would be much more complex than he had imagined. The letter, the trip, the lawyers, and even the mansion were telling him something. And what he was beginning to realize, more than anything else, was that he was being pulled into something much bigger than a simple inheritance of money. There was a story behind all of this, and Lucas knew that to unravel it, he would have to go much deeper. What he didn't know, however, was that this journey would not be just about understanding his true origin. He was about to discover that, in his quest, he would end up confronting something much more dangerous than he had imagined. As Lucas rummaged through the documents and questioned the lawyers, something began to form in his mind. It wasn't just an inheritance of material possessions that he had discovered, but something deeper, something hidden between the lines of the stories he heard. During his conversations with the lawyers, it was gradually revealed that his biological parents were not simple people who had disappeared without reason. They had renounced their wealth. Why would they do that? Why give up everything they were about to receive? Lucas felt a growing pain in his chest, as if he was finally beginning to understand why his family had always seemed so distant, as if it were something he could never reach. His parents' decision to renounce the fortune was, in fact, a reflection of their own beliefs and values. They had sought a simple life, away from the intrigues of high society and the shackles of wealth. They wanted to be free, away from the pressure of maintaining a status, of living according to the expectations of a traditionally wealthy family. This choice was painful but necessary. They understood, perhaps earlier than many, that true wealth is not in gold and material possessions, but in human connections and the freedom to live authentically. And it was this that, in some way, made them distance themselves from everything they once thought was important. Lucas was perplexed by the revelation. What he had imagined to be a life tragedy, an abandonment without explanations, now seemed to be a conscious choice by his parents. They had opted for something simpler, purer, but in doing so, they had left a legacy of mystery and an inheritance that Lucas was now trying to understand. He wondered, why didn't they tell me? Why wasn't I raised with this legacy? The pain of growing up alone, without explanations, without love, now mixed with the weight of the discovery. His parents, whom he had imagined to be victims of circumstances, were actually making a choice for their own happiness. And this choice came at a cost, not only for them but also for Lucas. With this new understanding, Lucas began to reflect on his own life. He had always struggled to survive, believing he was being punished by the loss of his parents and the lack of a family. But now, by understanding the reasons behind his parents' decision, he realized that their true struggle was not just against wealth, but against a system that made them feel that success was measured by the accumulation of possessions and status. Perhaps, by renouncing the fortune, they were trying to prevent Lucas from falling into the same trap. They knew, in some way, that the true value of life cannot be found in properties or inheritances, but in the choices we make and how we deal with our own stories. Meanwhile, the revelations kept coming. With each new piece of information, Lucas found himself more immersed in his parents' story and more confused about what he should do with what he had discovered. It was clear that the Alvarenga family, with all their wealth and power, had a very different view of life. They had chosen what was more difficult, but perhaps the truest. The question that began to arise was, how would he, Lucas, deal with this truth now? How could he balance his parents' legacy with his own aspirations? He still wondered whether he should embrace the wealth or continue the pursuit of the simplicity his parents had chosen. But the most intriguing of all was that, now, Lucas's journey seemed to have taken an unexpected turn. He was, without knowing it, preparing for a transformation. The revelation of his inheritance not only altered his perception of the past but also began to shape his future. How would he use what he now knew about his parents to make sense of his life? And how would this new truth impact his decision to move forward with everything that was about to happen? As Lucas continued to unravel his parents' past, he found himself increasingly entangled in the intrigue of the Alvarenga family. The revelation of his true identity seemed to have caused a whirlwind among the family members. While Lucas was trying to understand what was happening, he soon realized that his presence in the mansion was not welcome. The Alvarenga aristocracy, with its long tradition of power and wealth, saw Lucas as a threat. He was no longer just a humble mechanic from a distant city. He was now someone who could disrupt the stability that had been built over generations. Intrigues began, and with them, power plays. Lucas became the target of cold stares and cutting words. Although the lawyers continued to treat him with a certain deference, the family members viewed him with suspicion. They wanted to know what he intended to do with the inheritance. What did he want after all? Was he there to take what was theirs, to invade the peace they had built around their wealth? Tensions grew, and soon Lucas realized he was being constantly watched, as if he were a stranger in his own story. Conversations with the family were filled with euphemisms, promises of support, but also veiled threats. As the days passed, the attempts to silence Lucas began to intensify. Family members, especially a distant cousin, started trying to manipulate the information he had discovered. They wanted him to stay away, to abandon his investigations, as if the truth were a poison that should not be exposed. Lucas then realized that the true battle was not just against the disbelief of those around him, but against the family itself, which, instead of welcoming him, tried to silence him. They were afraid that he would uncover more, that he would expose something that could destroy the impeccable facade they had built over the years. But Lucas, for the first time, felt the strength of his truth. He would not back down. If his parents, with all their wealth and influence, chose to give up power, then he could also do something different. He did not want to follow the same path of manipulation, of power at the expense of others. He knew he had something much more valuable in his hands, the right to decide what to do with his own destiny. However, the family's pressure, the whispers in the shadows, and the indirect threats began to make him increasingly aware that he was dealing with something much bigger than a simple inheritance dispute. Lucas knew that to truly understand what had happened to his parents, he would need to unmask the hidden truth that the Alvarenga family was trying to conceal. But he also knew that by doing so, he was entering a minefield where every move he made would be carefully watched, and every mistake could cost him more than he was willing to lose. The fight for justice, to understand why his parents had made such decisions, was now turning into a silent war. And this war would not be won with words alone. As the atmosphere of tension increased, Lucas felt he was being tested at every moment. The pressure from the aristocratic family seemed to focus on him, but something inside him told him he was on the right path. He didn't know what the next step would be, but the truth now drove him with more force than anything he had ever felt. The big question was, how far was he willing to go to reveal what was hidden? And most importantly, was he prepared to face the consequences of this journey, where the truth could be the last weapon unleashed in the battle against the empire the Alvarenga family had built? With the revelations about his parents and the fight for the truth, Lucas began to realize that his true inheritance was not just in the fortune his parents had renounced, but in the legacy they left, the value of living with integrity, away from the traps of luxury and the oppression of power. He felt that he could not continue in the same direction that the Alvarenga family was pushing him. For him, true wealth was in giving something more to the world, and he was determined to transform the inheritance he now possessed into something greater than any material legacy. What the Alvarengas saw as a threat, he now saw as an opportunity to make a difference in the lives of others, especially children who, like him, grew up without family and support. With the decision made, Lucas began working on creating a charitable institution aimed at orphans. He knew he couldn't change the entire world, but he could change the lives of some. It wasn't just about donating money or opening a charity house. He wanted to create something that would reflect the values his parents represented, something that offered not only shelter but also love, opportunities, and, more importantly, the chance for a better future. He remembered his own childhood, the pain of loneliness and the lack of prospects. That was what motivated him to use his new position to give other children the chance he didn't have, a chance to be loved, to feel part of something greater than themselves. Building the institution was not easy. Lucas encountered resistance, both external and internal. The Alvarenga family, with their influence, tried in every way to prevent him from using the inheritance in this manner. They didn't understand why he wanted to give up a fortune to help others. But Lucas was firm in his decision. He knew that true greatness was not in accumulating wealth, but in transforming the world around him, even if it was through small actions. He sought partnerships, worked tirelessly, and little by little, the idea took shape. The institution he founded became a symbol of generosity, a reminder that even in the greatest difficulties, it is still possible to find purpose. Looking back at his own journey, Lucas saw that true change had not occurred when he discovered his origin or his fortune. True change came when he chose to use his new understanding to help others. He began to realize that, instead of trying to rescue what he had lost, he should focus on creating something of value for those who, like him, were still lost in the world. He had discovered that the true meaning of inheritance was not money, but the ability to change someone's life, to give a second chance to those in need. Over time, Lucas's institution became more than just a refuge for orphan children. It turned into a movement. Those who had been touched by his story began to join him, bringing support and more resources. Lucas's message spread, and the idea that a person's true inheritance is not in their material wealth, but in the impact they have on others, began to gain strength. The children who had once been left behind were now receiving the tools to have a better future, to overcome their own struggles, and to become better people. And so, Lucas's legacy was not defined by the money he received, but by the transformation he caused in the world around him. He learned that, although fortune can give us a start, what really matters is what we do with it. The greatest gift he could offer the world was not luxury or material goods, but the chance for a different future, a new beginning for those who, like him, were once forgotten. And by doing so, Lucas discovered that his parents' true inheritance was not the wealth they left behind, but the ability to transform others' lives and thus create an eternal legacy. Now that you know Lucas's story and the impact of his discovery regarding the disappearance of his parents, the question remains: what would you do with the truth if you were in his place? Many of us spend our lives trying to understand who we really are, and often, the truth is right in front of us, waiting to be discovered. But are we ready to face it? And more importantly, how can we use the lessons from this story to transform our own lives? No matter how much you are going through difficulties, there is always an opportunity for change, to do something greater than you imagine. So, what are you going to do now? Will you settle, or will you act to change your destiny, just as Lucas did? Subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and continue following our stories to learn how to take the next steps to transform your life.